So, it's been recorded in books, poems, photos, movies, that the ocean is the most beautiful, immense, and yet a demanding environment. Over 70% of our Earth's surface is ocean, yet we know so little about it. It's an austere environment, opaque in many ways, and yet maritime systems are highly strategic in terms of the world's interconnectedness. If you think about it in terms of global trade, over 80% of all global trade is moving over the oceans. Ports become highly strategic for multiple reasons. 99% of international internet traffic is actually carried on subsea cables that are in exposed regions, and it's hard to protect on the ocean floor. So not surprisingly, we find that the seas are historically at the center of convergence of great power competition amongst military forces. In sum, maritime innovation is immensely important to U.S. national security. So welcome today to IQT Explains, a series of IQT podcasts where we explore technology trends and their impact on national security. I'm Jon Chait, managing partner at IQT, and the host of this episode. Today, we're going to explore the importance of maritime innovation, and we have with us Paul Lwin, the CEO of HavocAI. I want to start by acknowledging that Paul is a graduate of U.S. Naval Academy. He's a decorated Naval Flight Officer who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2024, he took on a new challenge of founding HavocAI, proudly as an IQT portfolio company. Havoc takes a software-first approach, is my understanding, Paul, to enable military and commercial grade autonomous systems across land, air, and sea. And thank you very much for joining me. And I hope for our audience, everyone's going to get a chance to learn today more about how you're operating, what we see operating in terms of maritime innovation. Welcome.
Thank you, John. And thank you for those kind words. And thank you to IQT for supporting Havoc.
Yeah, we're glad to, Paul. Really proud. Tell me a little bit about what brought you to be a founder in this space. So after committing so much to service, and we thank you for that service to the nation, now trying to do something, bringing new innovation to bear to mission. What drove you to make this choice to actually become a founder in a venture?
It's my root being a naval officer, right? You just hit it. The maritime space is fast, it is challenging, and it is the space that there's the least innovation in right now. Coming from my Navy background, I flew a plane that was built in the 1970s in Iraq and Afghanistan. And at the time, I was thinking, what are we doing? We spent hundreds of billions of dollars buying technology, and this is the best I have. So that kind of led me to want to help. So, I went into flight tests, helping flight test F-18s and next generation jammers, and then eventually left the service to help private industry understand the problems that we were facing in the military. In 2024, it led me to, and my co-founder, Joe, to start Havoc because we were not seeing the maritime autonomy space focus on the right problem, right? The problem isn't building boats. The problem is how do you get thousands of these boats to be autonomous and to be collaborative and to do real missions for the humans. And so that's what we set out to solve. And that's what excites me as a founder, right? That I get to wake up every day to try to solve a problem that is relevant to my friends still in the Navy right now, and that I get to make an impact every day.
Important insight to any founder listening in our audience. And as well, we thank you for that service and to the proud and very brave men and women of our service forces that are protecting us every day.
Thank you.
So, Paul, you were just describing, what it was to come from an experience of serving a mission and in very specific types of older aircraft, older systems. And today, when we think about Navy, about 291 is the quote from the Rear Admiral Ben Reynolds, the active, battleship forces. About a little over a third of them actively deployed globally at any one time. But yet Navy has made it really clear that they're interested in potentially fielding thousands, if not tens of thousands, of surface, subsurface, and aerial systems in the future as autonomous systems. Part of that is also about the forces that we see adversaries commanding in this area and the diversity of what we see in the Ukraine conflict, as well as what we're seeing today in the Iran conflict as well. How does that frame an opportunity for you and where Havoc goes to contribute to mission?
It's a huge opportunity. You just described it very accurately. What we're seeing is a transition from using manned legacy exquisite vessels, right? If you think about guided missile destroyer or a carrier, they're big, they're expensive. A destroyer costs $3 billion. There's around 50 people on it. And now, because of the last 10 to 15 years, all the militaries around the world are starting to reimagine, hey, do we really need a $3 billion ship to do everything? Or can we split it up into thousands of smaller ships And so there's an opportunity here to reimagine how do you sense the maritime environment, and then how do you affect the maritime environment without having to build, thousands of ships. At the end of the day, it's we just don't have the capacity to build thousands of ships like we used to anymore. As a company that is in the autonomy space, and specifically collaborative autonomy space, it is a huge opportunity for us to help our customers, specifically the Navy and the Army, figure out how to integrate autonomous systems so that they get better quality than the existing systems that they have today.
Interesting. So it's not just a system force on force. There's an economic warfare that's going on as well, where an exquisite system or a high-end missile system could cost $1 million to fire something off, defending against something that's attacking that could be a $15,000 to $25,000 system being brought against you.
At the end of the day, warfare is economics, right, at some point. And so, the reason we won World War II was because we could produce a lot more things, than the other two sides combined. So you look at Ukraine, this is a country with no navy that took on what we at the time thought was the best navy in the world. And they went toe to toe, right? Now there are ships that can't leave the harbor because, the Ukrainian USVs are so effective at what they do. And those cost probably, $200,000-$300,000. And those warships cost hundreds of millions to billions of dollars. So now it's an asymmetric nature to warfare that we all have to go solve, right? We've been on the receiving end of that in the Strait of Hormuz conflict. I think everyone is learning from this, and now we're looking to the next conflict to make sure that we're not on the receiving end of that.
I know in your software-first approach, you are building things that are on both a domain autonomy level. How do we help a particular sea vessel, a ground vehicle, an aerial drone actually operate autonomously, as well as the orchestration around those systems, swarming, how you're going to command and control all those various assets, and the communications that also integrate them as well. So before leading you down one of those paths and have you pick your favorite child, as it were, what's an area of technology that gets you most excited about where you're innovating, where you see innovation happening today?
It's what you called orchestration. We hate to use buzzwords, so we like to talk about collaborative autonomy, right? If you think about those two words there, they really explain what we're talking about when we say orchestration. So when we say autonomy, we're talking about systems that don't require a human in the loop persistently, right? I should be able to tell these systems, search this area, transfer supplies between these 2 points, and they just go and do it. But one autonomous system by itself, it's not really that useful, right? If you think about the ocean, and you started talking about it in the intro, the oceans are massive, right? We're talking about like thousands of miles. In the Pacific Ocean, it's 8,000 miles. So you have to think through the problem on the scale of thousands of systems. And that's where the collaborative nature comes in, right? These systems have to work together on a scale of hundreds to thousands, and then they have to be able to work with the humans, right? Because if the humans can't really use these, they're not really useful tools, right? We're not building these systems for scientific research. They need to solve an actual problem that the actual warfighters have right now. And that's why I got into this, is to help solve real problems.
Boy, we really appreciate that, Paul. What's an area of emerging technology that might surprise our audience? So not necessarily something that you're working on. Are there areas that you're tracking that you're like, this is actually opening our eyes to some change that's happening?
The answer is going to be pretty obvious. Gen AI, right? And LLMs, large language models, even in the autonomy space, you would be surprised how much we use it, right? Not just, helping us review our codes or implement things, but inside of our models, right? My background from school is in computer vision, right? But that was 10 years ago. And now my perception team, the work that they're doing using visual transformers, right? It's phenomenal. Like, we have reached a level of technology where machines can really understand the environment they're seeing, right? And to them, it doesn't matter if it's visual or if it's, RF, the EW environment that they're sensing. It's the data that they care about. From that data, you can train these models to understand what's going on around them. And in autonomy, if you can't understand what's going on around you, you can't act on it, right? So that's the biggest piece. The important thing there is the data, right? If you think about it, you have to go collect the data. And that's why Havoc it's incredibly competitive, right? We've got 100 autonomous vessels that we put in the water all across the world. We've collected over 150 billion data points now, and that's what we're using to train our models. And we're getting to the point where, some of our models are matching reality, right? Which is where we want to get to.
That's interesting. So for the audience, big data, 150 billion, 200 billion data points. I've seen it reported you have like 25,000 hours of training time actually watching vessels, not using just simulated data, but actually in environment, taking on action missions, behaviors that you're trying to train, plays that you can call, as it were, with the system. That would seem to be a major area of competitive advantages to anybody building in the space. How do you actually reconcile taking something from concept to action, and especially when dealing in the ocean environment where the environment's so diverse? You have to be able to deal with a slew of different circumstances, both from the environment and in a sense of multi-domain orchestration, that you could have any particular actor or drone, autonomous system in a particular environment under command, and one may lose part of its capabilities. One may actually be lost entirely for operation. And how does that particular mission type, go on? Has that been a primary focus for HavocAI?
It has been the sole focus from the beginning. I think we could have just started with just building one boat and then say, look, I got an autonomous boat and, claiming all these things. But we started by building 12 boats right away. There were 5 of us with less than $1 million in pre-seed funding, because from the beginning, we understood that the data, right, going out to capture real data was what was important, right? That we couldn't do this if we couldn't put, 10 to 12 boats on the water almost every day. Our maturity is tied to the amount of data we're able to gather, and that's tied to the amount of real autonomous systems that we can put in the real world. So now, we've expanded from boats into air and ground vehicles. It's the same thing, right? We have to put real assets in the air and on the ground. And they need to not just sit there collecting data, but to try to do real things, right? And at first, we want perfect, right? We had probably a 60% solution, and now we've got into the 90% solution, right? From just iterating over and over. But that's no different than what software companies do, right? That's the beauty of making something a software problem, right? That's how, we have iPhones and all these apps and, Gen AI these days, right? It's the ability to iterate quickly that only happens when you make something a software problem.
Paul, you're giving a live example of that. We do invest in execution, but we invest in great people and great teams. People are the value engine. I hope people are already getting a sense at the early part of our conversation here, what you bring to the table in terms of perspective, and also the ability to pivot and make the choices that are necessary to build a much larger enterprise. It doesn't go according to script, as we all know. Anybody out there that's been a venture, been a leader of one, it doesn't work that way. And we're proud to be working with you. So when thinking about maritime missions relevant to our government partners, both U.S. government, and I know that you can support allies as well, we currently are looking at obvious areas of the world. The conflict going on the Strait of Hormuz, what now is going in the Black Sea, the future that could be drawing us into the need to have deterrence, and I hope never need to fight, but if so, be able to win a battle in the Taiwan Strait. Each present different nuanced challenges. It's not exactly the same, operationally, environmentally, geographically. And there's a responsiveness to changing requirements in general to enter this space. So as you build solutions, as an entrepreneur tries to enter to provide solutions in this space, how do you design for specific operational regions? How do you choose what to prioritize?
You got to go talk to the customers, right? I think obviously that's not surprising to you as an investor, especially in the commercial space, right? Companies that go and solve an actual customer problem win, right? And otherwise, you're just a research lab thinking that, you're building the thing that's going to solve all of the problems. So when we built those 12 boats, we took it to a U.S. Navy exercise on the Great Lakes, and we let sailors play with it, and we took their feedback. And, you'll be surprised when people actually see something that can help solve their problems. They're very open to, I can use this to do X, Y, and Z, right? And what we do well is we listen to them. And then we don't say, I've got the perfect solution for you, right? We go back. And because, again, we're a software company, we can easily iterate and change things. And then the next day they come back and we're like, hey, that thing you talked about yesterday, I could do it now, right? And then you show that to them and it blows their mind. So like it's an iterative process even with the customer, right? You have to realize that when we're talking about autonomous systems at scale, even the warfighter side, right? They are just starting to think through what they do with them, right? The logistics involved, the launching, deploying, maintaining, and then even, hey, what use cases can I actually use them for? So it has to be truly collaborative with the customers. And we've been successful incredibly in those areas because we're tied in with the customers, the end users, and the different stakeholders to understand the problems we're solving. So we prioritize the problem sets that are actually problem sets, right? That our warfighters are telling us that they need something to solve.
If there was an additional step of signal that you wished you could have from government, what would it be?
Contracts, right? So you're one of my investors, so I think you would agree with that. But on a serious note, I think it is getting better, right? I think the last year, there's been a transformation in the Department of War and the U.S. government in general to find innovation and to fund it and to make sure what the innovative companies survive. I think we're seeing that. We're beneficiaries of that. And I think I'm very optimistic for that. They are sending out the signal, right? Obviously, me being a fast-moving founder, I want things to come quickly, right? But, you have to remember that the U.S. government, they have to be prudent in how they spend our money, right? It is all of our money at the end of the day. I have to do deep breaths and to be patient because, when they say, hey, just be patient, we're working on something, it's going to come to you. In the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm a VC-funded company. I have, 20 months of runway. So you've got 20 months to figure it out because at some point, I have to become sustainable on my own, right? Without reason to continue funding. We have very patriotic investors that have invested in us, including, InQtel. It's making sure that the government side understands that, it's not for free, right? The investors do expect a return. And so we're willing to work with the government to figure it out, right? To get to that state where we can get those big contracts and we can become a profitable company.
So in a moment, I'll turn back to actually where you're building in multi-domain as well, where your roots were in the maritime space. You've expanded into ground autonomy and aerial autonomy additionally. Let's hold there for a second. The audience will be interested to hear that topic in a sec. Often when I talk to entrepreneurs and founders, we talk about 3 Fs: focus, and even more focus
yes.
to be successful. And it can't be said once. It can't be said too many times. There are components of your system of systems, as it were, literally components or subcomponents in a software sense, that you could be building everything, but there's some that are difficult to source or difficult to gain on a reasonable timeline. There are things that could benefit from someone else doing it better, where you have to partner. Help our audience understand where some of those are. What choices have you made in terms of where your focus is and where partnerships become so important to innovating?
That's a great question, right? If you think about it, we don't take the approach of vertically integrating and trying to build everything, right? What we're building is so complex and so sophisticated that it would be nearly impossible, no matter how much money we have to go do that, right? And then it's also incredibly wasteful because in some areas, we don't need to recreate things that already exist, right? There are things like autopilots or PID controllers. Those are an established things in the hobbyist community and in the robotics industry that people have been building, right? And I run into a lot of companies that are rewriting it from scratch and rebuilding even the electronics from scratch. And it blows my mind because I'm like, you don't need to rebuild it. So we save money by using things that already exist in commercial industry. And those products are way more reliable, right? So a lot of times when we go out to these exercises with warfighters, one of the things they always say to us is it's incredible that Havoc stuff always just works, right? They say, we turn it on and it works. And I'm like, yeah, it's because we're a software company and the hardware we use, those are proven items, right? Like that, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people are using those components already. And so, of course, it works, right? Because otherwise, those companies wouldn't stay in business. When we're figuring out partnership, that's the biggest thing, right? Does it already exist? Does it work better than anything I can recreate? And can I save a lot of money from doing it?
And you put that into practice around, say, partnering with shipbuilding, for your roots, where I often thought that your first vessel that you did produce directly, and you were launching it out, the Rampage, the 14-foot vessel you brought to market, that was a means, not an end. You were moving towards developing your autonomous system. You had to have vessels on the water being put into
Yeah.
operational action to be able to develop those hours of training time and the data points that you were collecting. But from there, you've now partnered with 6, 7 plus different, shipbuilders of all different sizes. I see you making announcements with PACMAR being down selected in the MUSV program.
Yeah.
I see you talking to, Hanwha about 200-foot, vessels as well. Really broad range, but I think people could be confused. Are you building those, or are you bringing a software-first approach to partnership there?
Software first approach to partnership. And so that's a really great question. And that goes into like how Havoc functions as a business. If you think about even the 14-foot vessel, people think we built it, right? We don't actually build it. We designed it. We actually own the IP rights to the physical design, but it's commercial builders that built it, right? What we did was we are in Rhode Island. So we went out into the commercial boat manufacturing industry and we said, hey, like, is this easy to build? And all of them said a boat's a boat, right? Like they built composite, fiberglass boats using advanced manufacturing techniques. And to them, it didn't matter. Actually, it was easier for them to build a boat that doesn't carry people because they could do away with a lot of the structures to keep people safe, right? So they loved it. There's enough commercial boat builders in the US and all over the world to be able to build these vessels at scale right now, right? So once we realized that, we knew we didn't need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars recreating manufacturing facilities that existed, right? I think we might be the only one with an actual 100-foot vessel in the water already, right? Again, that's because we partnered with a commercial naval engineering company who already had designed that vessel and built it already, right? And we took it and we made it autonomous. So that's what we provide to, all of our partners, right? Hanwha, PACMAR. It's that, they can get our software, and if they can build the vessel quickly, we can have an autonomous vessel. It doesn't matter what size it is in the water that's walking, doing real world missions within a matter of months.
Incredible. Let's go back to two phrases we've used a couple times, then we'll double click down. First is collaborative autonomy. Help our audience understand a definition of that, because there are a lot of innovators that are trying to work around this space. It's key to your mission. How do you define collaborative autonomy?
I'll use it from an operator perspective, right? Whether it's you or me or any of the listeners right now, most of us don't have PhDs in robotics or autonomy. If we're going to use thousands of these robots, it doesn't matter, if they're humanoid robots or little, ground rovers or aircraft or boats. It is the user that is going to have to use it, right? So the first speak of collaborative is with the human. The human has to be able to easily test these robots to be able to do something, right? So we have highlighted ourselves by showing that end-to-end capability because, you've controlled our boats, right? Like it took you a few minutes to understand how to control our boats and then to go do it. That's the level we're walking towards. And so it's the collaboration with the human who needs something done. And then it's a collaboration between these robots, right? One robot by itself doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't matter if it's in an air, ground, or sea domain. Thousands of robots communicating, sharing data, and working as one system. Now that's powerful, right? That can solve a lot of problems. So I'm a former electronic attack guy from the Navy. One of the things we have shown just with 10 of our Rampage vessels is, by putting software-defined radios on them and putting 10 out there, right? You've got a distributed array over a giant area, right? Even, 5-6 miles, if you think about it, and the ability to detect things confidently and with a high resolution, it's phenomenal, right? It's mind-blowing. And those are $200 software-defined radios that we just put on to test it out. And so if we're able to do that on the scale of 1,000, right, and they all talk to each other and they all share data, now it's really going to be difficult to hide from this system. Right, we're talking about creating 1,000-mile of a distributed sensing network, and that's what excites us, right? That is collaborative autonomy. A lot of times, the sexy use cases, a boat targeting another boat, gets talked about as autonomy. 90% of the use case is going to be these boats sitting in the ocean, sensing and trying to figure out what's going on so that a human can make the decision.
And that maritime domain awareness, MDA, that we talk
Yeah.
about a lot, and I know we're having meetings here in our office today, focused on that, is so dramatically important because of how vast the space is.
Exactly.
Because the subsea is actually opaque, and many that operate at subsea are trying to stay out of sight, trying to not be detected. And so the opening up of this domain awareness with lots of different types of assets and distributed networks becomes even more important over time.
100%. And if I could highlight there, right, even for the subsea, we've worked with another in-house company, Vadin, right, to launch their systems and then to provide data relays for them, right? So if you can have 1,000 boats out there, all with acoustic modems, you can essentially pass data to these UUVs when they need it, right, or to these submarines. The ability to deploy thousands of autonomous vessels is what we should really go after.
Well, now we're moving into the area of multi-domain autonomy. No matter which way you want to look at, you're controlling different types of systems. They're operating in different environments and trying to integrate the capabilities. How does HavocAI think about and operationalize multi-domain autonomy?
From the beginning, we have been chasing multi-domain, right? I'll tell you, sir. So I'm obviously a former Naval Flight Officer, so aviation is in my blood. It would have been so difficult to get even like tiny quadcopters to fly 10 quadcopters. There's regulations that prevent you from doing that, right? You can't just do it everywhere. So we almost cheated the system, right? Because boats are so incredibly easy. They don't fall out of the sky, right? If there's a software problem, they just sit there. What we did was we designed our system so that 90% of the sophisticated algorithms and the models were not specific to the domain or the platform that they were going to be controlling. Like there's another 10% that is specific to the platform that they're on. So that 10% cares about it's an aircraft, it's a boat, it's a ground vehicle, even how big the boat is. But 90% of the stuff we work on, it doesn't really matter what it is, right? So that's the beauty of it. So we were able to mature it with the Rampage vessels, right? We've built 100 Rampage vessels, I think, up to now, and we've deployed 25,000 hours of it. And now all of that software is transferable. So about 8 months ago, after an exercise, we actually had the Army ask us, hey, these boats are really cool, but do you think you could do the same on a quadcopter? So the next week, we literally took a commercial quadcopter, we put the same software that was running on the boats, and we proved to them that we didn't change a line of code. We changed some configuration files, and that quadcopter did the same autonomous plays that the boats were doing. And that got us on an Army contract. Most recently for the CTO of the Army, Dr. Miller, he asked us to build a hunter-killer ground vehicle with this company called AZAC and another company called ACS. They thought it was going to take us weeks to do it. We did it in 2 days. And then we demonstrated it to the Secretary of the Army. It's demonstrating that our architecture to make sure that we were agnostic to domain and platform is maturing and that we can move at speed now.
And you definitely have hinted on a couple points there. Appreciate how quickly you're able to utilize the platform to deploy new capability as well, which is going to be crucial. That's something we're seeing from both adversaries. We're seeing the forces of Ukraine actually innovating quite rapidly, bringing together not just multi-domain, but capabilities into a system that didn't exist before and being very entrepreneurial in terms of how to put capabilities together that are effective. So sometimes we're motivated by understanding what the customer's needs are, and that's key to any great venture. And other times we are keenly aware of what adversaries could have in the same challenge because we have smart people, adversaries and anywhere else could have smart people as well, and what we face. What concerns you about what our warfighters are potentially facing in terms of what adversaries around the world could be fielding that we have to be ready to contend with?
That's exactly what concerns me. It's that we can't keep pace with the people that we might have to go and fight, right? Things become outdated on the order of weeks out there, both platforms, even the sensors and the software. So obviously, we're talking to the Ukrainians a lot, and it's mind-blowing how quickly they have to change. And they realize it's a software problem, right? It's the software that enables them to quickly change. And obviously, the hardware, they're moving quickly. We stole the approach from them, right? They're taking commercial off-the-shelf products, and they're just putting it together, putting some software on it, and they're using it as a weapon system. We have to be ready for that. And what we have to do, both in industry and inside the services, is to make sure that we know that this is the future of warfare, right? We might go into a conflict not knowing what the other side is going to be able to do. And we should assume they are going to be able to iterate very quickly on their weapon systems, and we need to be able to do the same, right? Because, we're so used to this Cold War mentality, and obviously in the war on terror, there wasn't much innovation, right, on the other side. Now we have to assume, right, innovation is a weapon on its own, that like we need to be able to innovate once the conflict kicks off. That's what Havoc is trying to provide the Department of War and the U.S. government, is making innovation a weapon system, right? Giving the warfighter the chance to innovate, to iterate, and to adapt to the changing conditions out there.
And I'll give you and your team credit beyond that. And this speaks to any entrepreneur trying to innovate in the maritime space. You need to not just create a prototype, you have to be ready to meet the speed and scale that's necessary to meet the challenges or threats that are soon upon us. And I think that that's where your style of how you're to be able to deploy systems so quickly, innovate and iterate openly is the key competitive advantage.
We think so. Thank you.
Let me help with closing. We're coming to the end of our conversation. What's the most important thing you'd like our audience to understand about HavocAI? So if you were going to summarize, what's the one takeaway that you would want them to understand? And in addition to your company, what do you want them to understand about what it takes to innovate in the maritime space?
I think a lot of times people look at Havoc and say, oh, they have great technology, right? And that's not the main thing I'm proud of. I have a great team, and they're all passionate. These are people who chose to come to Havoc. They could have gone and worked anywhere else. They believe in the mission. And also, they get to play with robots every day, right, in the real world. But they're also passionate about the mission. So that's what is incredible to me, right? To see every day the pace at which we're building new innovation, new technologies that are directly solving some use cases that some customer told us that they're having. And so that's the biggest thing I want people to take away. I think the biggest compliment we get from customers is how easy it is for them to work with the Havoc team, right? That we listen, we adapt, and we integrate, and then we come back with a better solution the next day. That is our secret sauce, right? Obviously, we have a lot of brilliant engineers and brilliant teammates selling to the government, but it's our ability to be good people, good human beings that are passionate about solving the warfighter's problem. I think that's our biggest competitive advantage.
Really appreciate that. And I think that's a message to all the entrepreneurs that are listening on today's podcast as well, to understand the challenges to try to meet speed and scale, the value of people in that equation, and that you are driven to every day try to deliver on the mission. Let me bring us to closing here, Paul. Really appreciate you helping to unpack what is so difficult to sometimes decipher in terms of the challenges in the maritime environment and what it is to be an entrepreneur trying to innovate and drive to meet these challenges, again, at speed and scale. Thank you very much, Paul. We appreciate you contributing, and thank you to our audience for listening.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
So to our audience, thanks for listening to this episode of IQT Explains, a series of the IQT podcast. Subscribe for more, leave us a review, please, and visit IQT.org to learn how tech is shaping national security.
If we were all on a ship, stranded at sea, I'm very curious what each of your roles would be.
Paul, your instincts are probably going to be better than mine.
Oh, I would be the guy fishing. Because I would get hungry easily. So not that I'm a good fisherman, just that I get hungry easily.